So good afternoon. We want to welcome you to our session today. This is one of our Black History Month programs that's being sponsored by the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Health Equity. And we want to thank you for taking an hour out of your busy schedules to spend time speaking with us today. And the topic that we're going to talk about, interestingly, is very near and dear to my heart, because many of you may not know, before I became Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, my research work as a faculty member in the School of Medicine was focused on how depression is a risk factor for diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic diseases. So, as we sort of think about that in the context of the Strong Black Woman Syndrome, which we will hear about, I think it's really important to really consider how have we been socialized, and how does that actually impact our mental and physical health, and how can we change the narrative so that we can really achieve our best wellness? So that's why I'm very excited about this session. And this is the beginning of a residence, if you will, a 3-month residency that Marita Golden, who I will introduce shortly, will have with us at Johns Hopkins Medicine. We'll have an event during Women's History Month in March, and we will have a creative writing workshop in April. So you'll be hearing more about those. So before I introduce our presenters today, I just want to give a disclaimer that even though my name is Marita Golden, and we're going to hear from Marita Golden, we are not related as far as we can tell. So the Goldens on my side of the family, on my husband's side, are from Georgia, and her Goldens are from the Mid-Atlantic area. Yeah. So we are connected in spirit, but I wanted to share that because I'm sure that there are many of you who are wondering. So it really gives me a pleasure to introduce her. Marita Golden is an award-winning author of 19 works of fiction and nonfiction. She is the recipient of many awards, including the Writers Award presented by Barnes & Noble, and Poets and Writers, an award from the Authors Guild, and the Fiction Award for her novel After, awarded by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. She has lectured and read from her work internationally. She is co-founder and president emerita of Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Foundation, and is veteran teacher of writing. She's taught at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, and has served as a member of the faculties and the MFA graduate creative writing programs at George Mason University and Virginia Commonwealth University. She has served as distinguished writer in residence at the MA creative writing programs at Johns Hopkins University, Prince George's Community College, and the University of the District of Columbia. As a literary consultant, she offers writing workshops, coaching, and manuscript evaluation services. So we want to welcome her to Johns Hopkins. And she is joined today by Dr. Pamela Brewer, who is a licensed clinical social worker and social psychologist, and is also the host of the YouTube series, My ND Talk with Dr. Pamela Brewer, a relationship and mental health program. She earned her master's in social work and clinical social work from New York University, New York, where she graduated with honors, and her PhD in social psychology from Union Institute and University of Cincinnati, Ohio. She has over 30 years of postgraduate clinical experience. Dr. Brewer is licensed in Alabama, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Texas. She has served as executive director of the Life Experiences Activities Program Incorporated, or LEAP, in Silver Spring, a vocational rehabilitation agency for adults with disabilities seeking competitive employment. She has also published many articles and made appearances on local radio programs and local and national television programs discussing mental health issues, including marital health, the existence and healing from domestic violence, elder abuse, trauma, depression, healthy relationships, self-esteem, and more. So we want to welcome Ms. Golden and Dr. Brewer to Johns Hopkins, and thank you again for doing this program for us.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Dr. Marita Golden, for the very generous response to my book, and for the invitation to do a 3-month virtual residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital around this issue. This book has been not just a book for me, but it's been a journey. This is a book that I wrote during the crucial year 2020, when we were all on lockdown, and the issue of mental health, Black people's mental health, Black women's mental health became a very important issue that we were suddenly talking a lot about. This book is a journey because it's inspired me to write a workbook. It's inspired people to ask me to do mental health workshops. So I'm still learning. I'm still trying to become a new age strong Black woman. And I'm really excited to be doing this program with my good friend, Dr. Pamela Brewer, who I interviewed for the book. And we're going to talk about a number of topics. First, I want to define what we're talking about. And then I'm going to read a few short sections from the book to give everyone a flavor of the book and how I tell the story and interrogate the story of the Strong Black Woman Complex. And then Pamela and I will engage in a conversation, and then we'll really be glad to take questions and comments from the audience. So those of you, this is Black History Month, and I know that there are a lot of Black women in the audience, and we all know instinctively, we all know sort of in our bones and our blood what we mean when we say the Strong Black Woman Complex. We grew up hearing our mothers say, "Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about." We heard our family tell us, you have to be twice as good, meaning you also have to be twice as strong to be a success in this world. And we have deeply acculturated and deeply accepted the idea that we are almost invincible, that we are resilient, that we can face and handle anything. And of course, that belief system is partially rooted in our experience of enslavement, where we were so damaged and wounded and worked as a people that we literally did not have time to think about self-care and our mental health. We did take care of our mental health, however, in singing gospel songs. We took care of our mental health in loving our family. But the toxic legacy of the Strong Black Woman Complex is something that we've only been able to discuss probably in the last 2 decades. And we're able to discuss it thanks to the civil rights movement, the women's movement, feminism, Oprah Winfrey opening the doors and the floodgates so that we could talk about all of our taboo subjects and issues. So what I found when I was doing this book is that I am a member of a growing army of doctors, scholars, ordinary women of all ages who have now decided that it's time for Black women to sit down. It's time for Black women to take a rest. It's time for Black women to take care of their health. One of the problems, of course, with the Strong Black Woman Complex is that it places us on emotional lockdown. It censors the expression of normal emotions like fear, anxiety, uncertainty, and it corrupts our relationships with those around us. It trains our families, it trains our friends that we can handle anything. We are the go-to person. And yet, ironically, we never have anybody that we can go to. The Strong Black Woman Complex also inflicts mental and physical damage because we simply don't take care of ourselves. African American women are in the midst of a major health emergency. We are the fastest growing group of women in America developing dementia. We have off the chart rates of diabetes, obesity, stroke. And one of the reasons, besides the continuing racism of the medical industry, is that we simply do not take care of ourselves. We take care of everyone else. We take care of ourselves last. And then you add into this brew the toxic ingredient of systemic racism. And my research over the past couple of years, as I've written about Alzheimer's disease, as well as this new book, has revealed that the impact of racism on our bodies is now recognized as a stress factor. It's a factor in our bodies, just like cells, like blood, like bones, and it shortens our lives. It makes it much harder for us to heal and repair when we are broken. And so when we do not have systems in place in our lives on a daily basis to release emotion, to breathe, for example, for a few minutes, when we don't have strategies in our lives where we are training people in our lives to care for us, to care about us, we are endangering our health. And we're in a way, I'm going to just say it, we're co-conspiring with systemic racism to our own demise. And Black women are dying in America disproportionately, and we don't have to. We want to live and we can live. So I'm really looking forward to talking more about this with Dr. Brewer. But I did want to, as I said, I want to give you a little taste of the book. And in the book is a book of voices. I'm a novelist, an essayist, and memoirist. I'm not a doctor, but I'm a Black woman and I know how to tell a story. And so the voices in this book, there's my voice. There's the voice of doctors and therapists. And they're the wonderful voices of Black women who I just asked, tell me, who made you a strong woman? Tell me, what has being a strong Black woman cost you? And there are the voices that I've resurrected of some of our sheroes. So I'm going to read, as I said, a couple of little passages, and then Dr. Brewer and I will start our conversation. I was a 21-year-old woman, and I was already a strong Black woman. Being a strong Black woman meant that you didn't bother others unnecessarily with your pain. In the small apartment where I lived with my mother was dying. My nights were sleepless, tear-filled meltdowns, in which in the dark I whispered and shouted and screamed the questions I was terrified to ask in the light of day. Why would I soon be a motherless child, and how would I go on? I'd rarely, if ever, seen my mother cry. Maybe she too cried in the dark. How I wish she cried in the light. Despite all that she'd made of her life as a part of the great migration of Blacks from the South to Washington, D.C., I know there was a lot she could have cried about. And when my mother was dying, I never told anyone except my best friend what I was going through, because I was 21 years old, but already I was a strong Black woman and I had work to do. One of the most meaningful parts of writing this book was to talk to Black women. And I specifically chose Black women of various ages and experiences to talk to me about the process of going into therapy. I wanted to find Black women who had suffered trauma, as we've all suffered various traumas, and who had taken the bold step to go into therapy and who had healed. I wanted to make a space in the book where they could talk about the lessons learned. And they were very generous in telling me their stories because they knew that these stories would inspire and help others. And this is a section from one of the, I call them testimonies, that the women shared with me. I kept moving up in my career in public relations. And I just want to say that these women, when you meet them in the book, you know this woman that I'm going to read. She's you. She's your sister. She's your mother. She's your aunt. So she's a friend. I kept moving up in my career in public relations, communications, and journalism. The higher up I moved, the more needy my family became. My sister and I are the only ones who went to college, the only ones with stable careers. And since my sister could and would say no, everyone came to me. A couple of years later, I was building a solid, satisfying relationship with a new man, building a life. I didn't want family living with me anymore, taking for granted that I would be the family ATM, minister, or therapist. The therapist helped me understand so much about myself. My philosophy was that if I'm only okay, if my family is okay. And since my family was always in crisis, I was never okay. I was always on call for any emergency. She asked me why I felt it was my responsibility to make my family members happy. She told me I could love them, but I didn't have to literally carry my family on my back. And she told me that the word no could be a complete sentence, and I didn't have to explain why I said it. I'm still learning to own my yeses and nos. I realized I was a control freak. Like a typical strong Black woman, I felt if I don't fix it, it won't get fixed. Now I give my family time and space to figure out their own answers and solutions. My therapist walked me through what triggered the breakdown I had so I could take action to defeat anxiety. the kind that made me crash and burn. I'm in a good place now for the first time in my life, saying unequivocally yes to myself. And those stories meant so much to me because as a journalist, as a writer, I talk to people who are strangers all the time, and they entrust me with their secrets. They entrust me with very, very intimate things. And when these women shared their stories with me, I felt deeply honored. And we need to make a space, a big space in our community where these stories are no longer marginalized or where no one feels ashamed of them. And the last section I'm going to read is a little bit from a section of the book called Reimagining the History of My Heart. And as I was writing the book, I was thinking about the ways in which we created these incredible sheroes, in which they created themselves. Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer, all these women who shaped and changed America and who are our heroes. And we go to them for inspiration all the time. But when we think of them, we never think of them as multidimensional. We only think of them as victorious, brave, resilient. And I wanted to give myself permission to speak in their voices if we had ever given them permission to speak about everything they had endured. And so I'm going to read the opening paragraph from the section that deals with Fannie Lou Hamer. I was one of the wretched of the earth. I was a sharecropper, the daughter of a sharecropper. The rich, black, fertile soil of Mississippi was in my bones. If I was mute and couldn't talk, my body could tell my story. My arms would tell you how, as the youngest of 19 children, I reached out to be held by a mother and father and brothers and sisters who sheltered and loved me. My hands would remember starting to pick cotton when I was 6. My feet would tell you about the feel of rags against their skin because I didn't have no shoes. My stomach would recreate the sound of being hungry all the time as a way of life, because that's the way everybody around us was living. I had polio. My womb would whisper and shed the tears I cried when I miscarried and then got sterilized without my knowledge. And after I was beaten in the county jail for working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, to register voters, my body never healed. How could it? When I said I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, I was sick. I was tired. And we have to make a space for Black women to say, I am sick and tired. And as a segue into my conversation with Dr. Brewer, I was in a conversation with someone the other day, and she said, you don't have to always call me strong. And I thought about that. I thought about, what else can you call a Black woman? So I said, you don't have to always call me strong. You can call me strong and someone who is loved, treasured, appreciated, valued, learning to set boundaries, learning to say yes to herself, seeking, resilient, wise, in need of support, going to be supported, vulnerable, allowed to have questions, allowed to not know the answer, listening to her heart, hears her soul, cares for her body, is not afraid to cry. You don't have to always call me only strong. Dr. Brewer?
Hello, how are you? I always enjoy listening and reading what you write. It is so powerful and empowering. As I was listening to you, talk about, of course, the strong Black woman, the thing that always comes to mind is the need for us to expand our view of the word strong. We tend to think of strong as, cement that doesn't break, because,
right.
If cement has a crack in it, then it's not strong, right? It has to be fixed.
Exactly.
But if we really look at what strength really means, it means that you have the strength and the courage to feel your feelings, as you've been talking about. to talk about what's going on in your life, to express your stress. And certainly as a therapist, I can say, you know, at the beginning of my career, to have a Black woman in my practice, she almost felt guilty for being there because she didn't have a right to take her business outside of the family. So we have done a lot of work, but there's so much more work to be done and so much more acceptance, I think, to be done in terms of the expansiveness of what the word strong means and how we experience and engage in strength and courage every single day.
I have had conversations with women who've read the book, and they've said, well, you know, Marita, after reading your book, you know, I feel like I can't call myself strong anymore. And I say, you know, of course you can call yourself strong. I'm very proud to say I'm a strong Black woman. It's just that definition. And it's going to take us time to understand the multitude of ways that you can be strong. For example, when Fannie Lou Hamer sat before that congressional committee and said that she was sick and tired of being sick and tired, she broke new ground, because you don't hear Black women advertising. We really forget how revolutionary that was for her to say publicly, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that is why I'm fighting for my people. But she didn't just say, I'm fighting for my people. She said, I'm sick and tired. And that was a really revolutionary thing for her to do in 1962 or 3 or whatever. Yeah.
And still today, for some women and some families, it's still a revolutionary thing to do and say and feel and express. But it takes a lot of courage, a lot of strength to say, I'm tired. No, period. End of story. No explanation for your no. No apology for your no, which is something that women do so often, you know, to express the stress that we feel. I don't know how a woman of color in this country, in the world in which we live, can be alive today and not have experienced a huge and drawn upon her strength without even defining it as strength. It takes a lot to get up in the morning and move through the day. Again, because there are so many complexities to being a woman, absolutely, but to being a woman of color, so much more so.
How do you, in your practice, how do you work with women who have broken down? For example, I have found in my conversations that a lot of times Black women have a body-mind disconnect. You know, the body-mind connection. But Black women have a body-mind disconnect. That is, we will feel pain in our bodies. Our mind will say, you need to go to the doctor, and we will tell our minds, shut up, I'm busy. Don't you know I have to do a million things? And so we're disconnected from the motivation that would really engage us in self-care. And we often have to break down totally break down. So when Black women come to you, how do you help them get to the point where they can engage in self-care, where they can breathe, where they can set boundaries? And how hard is it?
Well, it's hard, and freeing. But one of the things is, you know, when Black women come in and they say they've had a breakdown, you know what it often means? They cried in the office. Or they went home and somebody in the household said something that just sent them over the edge and they slammed the door. Or they didn't want to go to work for a week. And so their idea of breakdown is very different from what one would think of as a breakdown. Right. And so, you know, part of the beginning is their history. You know, what did you learn? What did you learn about your parents and your parents' parents? What were we taught to believe was true about us as women? What were we taught to believe about strength and our job? And the notion for many of my clients that her job is to not care for herself. Her job is to care for everything and everyone, but her job is to ignore how she's feeling, to pray away her feelings, and that certainly has value. But my goodness, you know, if you've got something going on physically, you need to deal with the reality that it is going on and there is help to be had. And so, those small but huge lessons and walkthroughs, the difference between what was taught, and understandably so, depending on the age of my clients and the age of their parents, what they were taught was what they needed to be taught to survive in those times. But the times are different. It wasn't healthy then, but it was life-sustaining. It wasn't all that great to say to somebody you were working for, I have a backache, I'm not going to work today, because you wouldn't go to work ever after that.
Exactly.
But so nowadays we know that we can do something a little bit different, although even then we have to be mindful in a different way. We can't necessarily say, I was cleaning my house all weekend and my back is killing. We can't say that. It's got to be something bigger for it to be accepted by the supervisor, depending on who the supervisor is.
Exactly.
But, a lot of times clients, once they begin to really let themselves feel, connect between the head and the heart, what they have gone through and what parents and relatives, have gone through, they're tears of tremendous relief. And sometimes there's really just sobbing, but it is so healthy and empowering. There's a lot to sob about. And when you let yourself know that it's real and you can do it, it's amazing. It's amazing and empowering.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when I have talked to a number of therapists, for the book and for these presentations. I asked one therapist if there was one thing that she would suggest for Black women to do for their mental health. She said it would be to slow down, to learn to take a breath. And I often talk about how important my relationship with my inner Marita has been. When I saw my parents die at 62 and 63, when I was 21 and 23, that scared me. And I decided that I was going to do everything I could to live as long as I could. And so I started very early meditating, walking, diet, big circle of friends, sister circles, wherever I was, going into therapy when I need it. I'm not perfect. I'm still learning. I'm still journeying. I'm still polishing. But those practices made a huge difference. And I really like to talk to Black women about getting to know themselves, saying hello to themselves. And my inner Marita is the person that I meet first thing in the morning when I wake up, when I take my first breath. And the thing about breath is your relationship with your breath is the most enduring relationship that we have. You take a first breath when you're born. You take your last breath when you die. You take 1 trillion breaths all during your life. And so doing periods of just silence, not necessarily having to go on a retreat, but maybe just an hour of silence, just being still with Marita has meant so much to me, because she tells me instinctively, go to the doctor, that ache or pain, you don't want to do that. And I think if Black women could just learn they would hear themselves, they would feel themselves, they would know themselves.
For I think about the Black health professionals I've worked with, and, I will talk about, first of all, there are layers and layers that come along with being Black and a health professional. We could talk about that for hours. But then the notion that it's okay and critical to take 5 minutes, a half hour. And I've had some clients say, a half hour? Could I do it for 15 minutes? Do I have to do a whole half hour?
Right.
Or I'll talk to them about breathing. No, don't breathe to the count of half a second and then you're done. Take in slow, deep breaths to the extent that you can. Sometimes there are lots of reasons why you can't take in a slow, deep breath. But if you can take a slow, deep breath to the count of 5, it is extraordinary how calm and relieving and stress reducing that is. But, I just want to speak to the issue of Black medical professionals for a moment, because we are living in a world, as we all know, which is fraught with so much, attention, so many demands on health, regardless of where you come down on the side of vaccination or not vaccination. As a Black health professional, you're walking into your office, your hospital, and you know people are expecting less and expecting more of you all at the same time. They are wanting more and really giving you more grief sometimes than is really necessary because of their own expectations. Right? It's not that anybody's a bad guy or a good guy, but we've just been socialized in that way. So you as a Black medical professional in particular, you're going in your office, particularly nowadays, and there are lives that you're trying to save, either literally save from the brink of death or save because you're giving them a different medication, a different prescription, a different exercise. But then you've got your own stuff to deal with. And somehow the notion of taking time away from your patients to deal with yourself. Well, wait, do you really want me to take a whole half hour? Couldn't I just do 15 minutes? I've got my patients to deal with. And we really need to give ourselves, as you said, space to have space, just to be. And you talked about meeting little Marita in the morning. I sometimes ask clients to say hello to themselves in the mirror and notice what they notice. That can be a powerful exercise as well.
Well, I'm going to tell you my mirror story. When I turned 50, I decided that I was going to look at my body for the first time. We shower, we wash our bodies, but we do not look at our bodies in a non-judgmental way. And so for the first time in my life, I stood naked before the mirror, and I had decided that I was going to look at my body with love and acceptance. And I spent about 15 minutes just touching my body, all the scars, the bumps, the bruises, the mosquito bites, the skinny legs, the flap. I just said, look, thank you. Legs, skinny legs, thank you for taking me this far, little beard that I get down here. My mama had that. I got that. I lived long enough to have it longer than she had it. So that, I just looked at my body for the first time ever and said, wow, thank you. Because we're always looking in assessment. We're always looking, to value. I want to talk now. There's so much to talk about, but I did want to talk about the whole issue of grief. Last week, as Dr. Golden and I were preparing for the residency and preparing for this program, we talked about grief. And, she shared with me, she said, Marita, it's not just that the nurses and the doctors at Johns Hopkins are stressed because they're seeing people die of COVID. We are all exhausted. We are all at our last nerve. And if we really calculate, what we're grieving the actual people who have died. We're grieving the loss of a feeling of safety in the world. We're grieving the loss of friends. Black people have lost white friends that they thought were their allies, and now they aren't. White people, sometimes some of them can't talk to their family anymore because they are now allies with Black people. Our children have lost a sense of just certainty about the world. So, and politically, oh my God, we're grieving the next apocalyptic event. So there's just so much grief that we are handling. And you talk in the book so beautifully, I thought, about Black women grieving. I have a section in the book called Another Mourning in America. And I talk about how, the mothers of these young people who have been murdered become iconic figures. And yet we don't offer them a space to hear their screams. We want to hear their measured grief, but not their real grief. And one of the most iconic ways of dismissing Black female grief is all those Black movies that we've seen and that we laugh at, where someone in the family dies and a Black woman, the aunt or grandmother, will go up to the casket and she just lets it out. She just performs, and we laugh at that. But that is one of the few times that we give ourselves permission to actually show what we feel. So let's talk about grief and Black women's grief and just what we're all going through.
Let me just say that part of the laughter that often happens when someone sees somebody falling out, if you will, over the casket is the discomfort with their own feelings and the awareness of their own grief that they don't believe that they can have.
Oh, thank you.
We as Black women, we live in grief. And again, that's a long conversation, or actually it's a short conversation. There's racism. Yeah. We live in grief. Yeah. That's just the way it is. But how we think about navigating it and what we give ourselves permission to do and feel, it's okay to be angry. A lot of times there's the comments about the angry Black woman. If you're Black and you're not angry, I'm worried, because you kind of have a right to be, and it's healthy to be angry. So, this notion that as a Black woman, certainly you lose your child. Well, even before losing your child, you're afraid when your Black male relative walks outside the door. Mm-hmm. That's a daily feeling. That's not an overreaction. That just is what it is. And then, heaven forbid, he doesn't come back through that door. The expectation that you will somehow launch a movement or be part of a movement to fight against this happening again, it's critically important. It's critically empowering. But you're right. How does that family have the space to express their own anger and their own grief? We have to be able to do that. And if other people don't give it to us, which often is the case, we have to give it to ourselves. We have to say out loud at home in front of the mirror to your next door, I'm mad, I'm hurt, and I'm angry. The other side of hurt and anger, is fear and sadness. Why not? I talked to, interestingly enough, it was a Black female professional the other day, and she was saying that she really didn't think that she was depressed. And how could you not be? Where do you live? Oh, I live in America. Okay. And what body are you in? Right. I'm in a woman's body. Okay. How could you not experience some measure of sadness? But, even with depression, we tend to see, first of all, we've been taught that you can't be depressed because it's a luxury that you don't have.
Exactly.
Which is not true. But the fact that we tend to think of depression as really the end of the depressive scale. If we are not in the corner under the bed, then we're not depressed enough to stay home or to get help or to talk to somebody, which is an absolute untruth, to put it kindly. So, I'm not sure that if I'm answering your question, but let me just say that for us, grief is so layered and so constant that sometimes it's almost hard to pinpoint how to grieve. And so often people will say to me, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Well, you're not supposed to do anything. What do you do? How do you feel? Or, you go to work and your boss says, well, you've lost X. Well, that person wasn't close enough to you. So you really should come back to work tomorrow. There's just so much. And we have to give ourselves permission, when I think about the word strong, to, again, at the risk of repeating myself, remember that strength includes tears. It includes taking a deep breath. It includes getting rest. It includes taking a shower for 5 minutes instead of 3. I mean, it includes whatever it includes for you, but we must take it. And we don't.
Mm-hmm. How can Black families help their mothers, the women in their families, find this state that we're talking about, this state of self-care and prioritizing? How do Black women train their families to care about them enough to say, let me do that for you? Do you want a day off? How do we tell people what we need? I mean, I don't have that problem, but how do women who would never even think to tell someone no, how do they begin to do that?
Even in the process of, even in your question, how do we train people? You're saying, how do we work? How do we work to help people help us not to work?
Exactly.
The easy answer and the hard answer is to say no. For families, because it's two different questions, right? How do families help, and then how does a woman take care of herself? A simple way for families to help is to ask that woman what she needs, not assume what she needs. Mm-hmm. Somebody will decide, well, you're really tired today, so I'm going to cook dinner for you. Well, cooking dinner wouldn't be mine, but it might be her way of relaxing. So maybe that's not the thing that would help. Ask her what would help. And for women, really think about, what do I need? Not what do I think I should need, but what do I need? Maybe I need 15 minutes to go in my room and sit down, period. That's what I need. I don't want to say hello. I don't want to say goodbye. I just want to sit. We need to, as women, we need to really think about sometimes what it is that we do need, what's going to work. And it doesn't have to be huge. It can be small. It can be 5 minutes instead of 2. It can be 10 minutes. It can be, I'm going on a girls' weekend. And what girls am I going with? Me. It can be that.
Exactly.
We can do it, but talking and listening, that's how you begin. And recognizing the complete joy and value of no.
Mm-hmm. So I love that you said to me, in essence, you don't have to train. You see, I love that you caught me giving Black women another job. That is my job to train you. No, it's your job to hear me saying no. And how you accept that or not accept it, that's your problem.
That's yours, right?
Exactly. I get to give you that. Let's talk about joy, to move away from grief. We've only got, in a minute, I want to open to questions, but Black women often believe that joy and celebration is a white woman thing because we're too busy. We don't have time for joy. And one of the studies I cite in the book is a study by a therapist down in Atlanta who did a survey of Black therapists, practitioners, and their clients. And many of them said, that's a white woman thing. Peace of mind, joy, all this stuff. Don't have time for that. And, I think that learning how to be joyful is a small, one little thing at a time. One little thing at a time that you do for yourself, that you do just for yourself. And a lot of times women don't want to do that because if they do something for themselves, it means they're by themselves. And by themselves, they may hear things, feel things, think things that they don't want to hear.
But may be critical to hear, not because they're critical, but because it's what they are thinking and feeling. The word mindfulness, of course, is on everybody's lips nowadays, but really what mindfulness, which is, it's valuable, it's a matter of being still in your space for 5 minutes and just noticing how you feel. It takes work not to allow your mind to be cluttered with your to-do list, but noticing that you're sitting in a chair and it's really comfortable, and sort of sinking into that. That takes work, unfortunately, because we've been socialized not to do that. But mindfulness, meaning really paying attention to what you're experiencing right now in the moment. That flower, it sounds hokey, but gee, that flower is amazing. It's amazing. It's so beautiful. That's a piece of joy. And of course, I always counsel my clients to go shopping, particularly on their birthdays. Get something for yourself that is wild, it's silly, it's stupid, it's crazy, it's whatever it is. But gift yourself with something that makes you feel good. And I can't tell you how many Black women look at me like I've lost my mind. It's not in the budget. Put it in the budget.
Exactly. And I do date, people talk about date night. I have date day with me, a me day. I'll wake up and say to my husband, well, today's a me day. I'm not talking for a while. I'm going to go out and do whatever. And he's fine with that. And I didn't have to train when we first got married 30 years ago, and I would go on silent retreats and I would have days of silence. My friends were astonished. He lets you do that. He lets you go away for a weekend by yourself. He lets you not talk to him for. I said, I wouldn't have married him if he didn't have that capacity.
Right. Don't train somebody in a way that you don't want them to learn.
Exactly.
And if you've got to train them to give you space, maybe you should think about it.
Exactly. I think now, Dr. Golden, we're ready for some questions if there are any.
Yeah, so I just want to thank you for this wonderful conversation. We have a comment in the chat that just says, thank you for the wonderful conversation and the reminder of the importance of self-care. So there is a question. It says, how do you cultivate new relationships when you're working on being your own, quote, new age strong Black woman, end quote? And this person says they find it difficult to get the women around her to open up about this. So this is sort of, cultivating, new friendships and relationships with people, thinking if we've been socialized a particular way, how do you help people to understand the journey that you're on and where you are in that process?
That question, at least from my perspective, is sort of a double-edged sword, because the question says, how do I work to help other women to work so that we can work together? Maybe part of it is, in terms of cultivating new relationships, it doesn't mean cultivating changing people's view of the world. Maybe it means being your own person, sharing your own view. And maybe that's the thing that, if it doesn't bring about change for them, then it doesn't, but it certainly brings about change for you. Marita, what are your thoughts?
Well, what I thought is that once you become this new person, girlfriend, you're going to start attracting some new girlfriends.
That's true, too.
That,
very
as
true.
you said, Pamela, you're not going to necessarily change their minds, but you're going to radiate. You're going to radiate an energy, and I mean that literally, that will bring people to you. I'll never forget years ago when I was in therapy and trying to figure out with the therapist why I kept attracting men that I didn't want, but I secretly did want for crazy reasons. And she said, we're going to fix it so that those guys will not come anywhere near you. So I said, oh my God, what are you going to do? You're going to work roots on me? Well, in essence, she did, because by the time I was finished with her, what she had taught me about myself, what I had been able to accept about myself, cleansed me and cleared me, so that literally those men no longer came anywhere near me, because I had become a whole woman looking for a whole man. I had been a half a woman looking for half a man. And so that once you become this woman who, is on this journey, believe me, you will attract, you will know how to find, you will seek. And those other women, they can still be your friends, but
absolutely,
you'll create new friendships. It'll be great.
We tend to attract what we expect. And so we need to really look at what our true beliefs are about friends, people, loved ones.
No, that's great. So here's this is a great question. So it says, as a woman in leadership, how do we dispel the myth of the strong Black woman in leadership roles where Blacks aren't normally represented and are often the only one? And in fact, where you might be I'll add to that, you might be penalized for showing any vulnerability or emotion.
I will say that vulnerability and emotion, you choose what you show, particularly in the workplace. You choose what you show and to whom you show it. And you don't have to empty all your wares. On the other hand, being vulnerable, being emotional doesn't necessarily mean being vulnerable. You're not a brick truck. You have feelings. And the reality is that if you and your colleagues recognize that you all have feelings, and you honor that, doesn't mean you agree with it, but feelings aren't a thing you agree with anyway. They're not up for agreement, but you honor that they are there. That's part of the issue. That's part of the way to deal with it. And it's a more complicated answer, I know, than what I've just given, but that's a way to begin to think about it.
And I think
Marita?
I think that what you're talking about is strategic. You want to be strategic. And whenever I found myself when I was in largely white environments, which most of my teaching career I was, it was very important to me to have a sister circle. The one time I was at a predominantly white institution, academic institution, where I was most unhappy was where at that institution I did not have a sister circle. When I was teaching at George Mason University, for example, there was a group of 5 Black women who were all writers. One of them, it was at George Washington. One was at UMBC. The rest of us were at George Mason. And I realized very soon I was going to have to get some sisters. I had to find some sisters wherever. I had to make a sister circle. And we would meet once a month for dinner and just sharing, chilling, venting, complaining, strategizing was a form of mental health. So I could work in that group. You know, the last time in the faculty meeting, such and such happened. What would you do? How would you handle it? And so you may not say anything in the crazy faculty meeting, but you may go to your boss and deal with him. I mean, I talk in the book about a situation where I was at a university and the chair of the department made a blatantly sexist comment. And I was tenured, and every semester I had lunch with the Black provost. So I was a position of power. So when he said this, and this came as a culmination of weeks of crazy white men doing crazy things, doing the things only they can do in meetings. And I said, you know what? I've had enough. And I said to the chair, I said, you know, I said, David, whatever his name was, you know, do you really mean that? I don't think you meant that. I think that's an insult to every woman. Total silence. You would have thought it was the end of the world. Not near person, near woman, near Black. I was kryptonite. Nobody came near me. But you know who came to my office 2 hours later? The chair of the department knocked on the door and apologized profusely because he remembered I had lunch every semester with the provost. I was tenured. We were in a Black city. Okay. So I chose strategically to do that. Now, if I hadn't been tenured, I would have handled it different. And then I had my, you know, I could come home to my husband and vent. So I had all these positions in the circle, but you have to be strategic. But
Absolutely.
You have to get support. I mean, every time I'm talking to younger Black women about going into the white world, I say, if there's no sister circle on where you work, form one from other women who work in your field. Do not let that situation drive you crazy.
Oh, that's some great advice. Great advice. So here's another really good question. So are there any differences in the strong sort of Black woman pre-pandemic versus now?
I think that what we've done is often to take on more of what we were already taking on. And that, you know, we know how to do it. We don't need to practice that anymore. We can practice being human.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I was sharing earlier this morning with Pamela that I had discovered a website called Black Women Widows Empowered. And there was an article talking about since COVID, their membership has really increased. And the fact that, you know, these women said on the website as one of the reasons that they had formed the group was that because being a Black widow was different than being a white widow. Because being a Black widow, you had to even be stronger. If you were strong before, you were strong like one before, you had to be a super strong Black woman now. So I thought that was so significant. And what Pamela is talking about is, no, you don't have to be super strong. This is the moment where you can lovingly offer your family and your children the opportunity to care for you, which you may never have done before. This is the prime time when you can offer. I'm talk about grief for a minute. One of the young women that I interviewed in the book shared after the book was complete, and I was just checking up on her, that her partner had died during the lockdown. He went to the hospital. They sent him home with aspirin. 3 days later, he's in distress. She's driving him to the hospital. He dies in the car on the way to the hospital. And she shared with me how she dealt with this with her daughter, who was 12, and loved her partner, as well as the 3-year-old child that they had had together. And she said, the first thing I did, I got into therapy. And the second thing I did was I let her see me cry. I didn't cry the Amazon River. I cried the Potomac River. I let her see me cry. And she knew, therefore, that she could cry. And we comforted one another. So you're right, Pamela. This is a crucial moment where we can go in the other direction.
You know, Marita, we're already super strong. We haven't had a choice. We're already there. So now we get to practice being gentle and compassionate with ourselves the way we are with everyone else.
Yes. And I would tell you, as somebody who does that, oh, it feels good. Doesn't it, Pamela? Oh,
absolutely.
It feels good.
Absolutely.
It feels so good.
So this is an important lesson learned then in the midst of the pandemic in a lot of ways, is to really change our frame of thinking. So this is another question from someone who actually had the chance to march with Mrs. Hamer in the civil rights movement. It was saying that, you know, when they would sort of be sitting in a church basement, afraid of what would happen when they would demonstrate, she had a way of pouring out confidence and saying, "Shall we sing?" And that was sort of a way in which she shared her strength. And he's saying that it wasn't until reading her biography that he realized the depth of her personal pain. So his question is, how do white allies help others in being able to express that pain?
Well, they read my book.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a good place to start.
That's a good place
and listen,
to start.
Listen. Don't decide you know. Decide to listen.
Exactly. Listen. Listen. Don't prescribe anything. Ask people to tell me your story, and then I'll tell you mine. But ask people, and I think one of the reasons it's so easy for me as a writer and journalist to get people to tell me amazing things is because nobody ever asks you to tell them your story. And I'm going to listen, and I'm not going to judge it. I just want you to tell me that story. So I think that white allies have a role to play in all of this because of their power, their systemic power, as well as their power in terms of their relationships with us, and just understanding the complexity of the Black experience. Oh my God, that's revolutionary.
No, that's great. That's great. So this is another important question. This may be our last one. There are others in the Q&A, but this is a really important one, probably Dr. Brewer, directed to you. Any recommendations on how to find an effective therapist? What are the considerations?
Check with your friends, first of all, to see who they've gone to and who they would recommend and why. You can also look at, there are various sites that specify that the therapists are Black. You want a therapist who's trained in whatever area you feel as though you want to work on. You know, if you're coming to someone having experienced a trauma, you don't necessarily, this is my bias, but you don't necessarily want someone who's only worked on eating disorders. Now, eating disorders can grow out of trauma, that is true, but unless they have the full expanse of trauma, that's really what you need to go to. And also pay attention to yourself, pay attention to what it feels like, and ask questions. Expect that you will get information. Your therapist is not there to tell you what to do, but your therapist is there to listen and to help you decide what's best for you. And if something is going on in treatment that doesn't feel right, you need to say something to the therapist directly and pay attention to how he or she responds to your concerns. That's the beginning.
And there's a website, Therapy for Black Girls, which is a really great place to begin. They have a list of Black therapists all over the country. And they do a lot of community building, podcasts, newsletters.
And locally, there's also the Black Mental Health Alliance, sort of in the Baltimore, D.C. area. So, those are places, to start. But I think the important point is, what I would say, as a clinician who's not, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but again, the link between mental and physical health is so powerful that, if my patient with diabetes has a high blood sugar, I would not dream of saying, you know what, we're just going to let that blood sugar run high and we're not going to treat it. So like if your blood sugar is broken, we fix that. So if your brain is not working as well, then we should fix that too. So we normalize it as a part of our overall, health and wellness, and really finding like the provider who will be able to understand you and your values and be able to work in that context. And so that may mean shopping around a bit, just like we might do with a physician for our physical ailments. So you find somebody who can identify with you and with whom you're comfortable. But, I would also add that if in fact, family or friends aren't as supportive, sometimes you have to make decisions for yourself that don't involve them so that you can get what you need for yourself. And that role modeling is very important.
And I'd also say that you shouldn't feel that only a Black therapist will be a perfect match.
Right.
Because more and more white therapists are learning how to be sensitive to people of color, understanding. And I only had, in the number of times I've been in therapy, I've only had one white therapist. I mean, one Black therapist. The white man, white woman, and a Black therapist for different things. And it didn't matter that they were white. So I think that I wanted to say that as well. Because people often feel, I have to have a Black therapist. I have to have a white,
No, you have to have a therapist who feels like a good fit and who can listen.
Right. Yeah. Well, we've had all kinds of comments in the Q&A that this was such a wonderful conversation, and we'll figure out a way to have sister circles across the organization, various ones. But I really want to point out that for those of you who will be joining subsequent sessions, that the issues that are really talked about in the book are really relevant to all women, and particularly women of color. So like next month, we want to explore that a bit and really, sort of expand the reach and the group that we're talking about, because I think these principles are true for all women. Black women, yes, there's a specific set of concerns, but what I've heard as your chief diversity officer over almost 3 years is that women from various backgrounds have many of these same concerns, and we need to be able to have forums where we can talk about this. So we'll be exploring more of that in March. So I just want to thank you all. And go and enjoy the rest of your day and have a nice deep breath, as Dr. Brewer mentioned for us. And we can't take half a second, we've got to take the full 5, and wish you great on your wellness journey. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.